In recent years, the USA has been dealing with a lot of prevalent firearm issues. In 2020 alone, 45,222 firearm deaths recorded in the US. And in 2022, 48,204 firearm deaths were recorded. The firearm deaths in ages 1 through 17 have increased by 106 since the year 2013, and it has now become the leading cause of death since 2020. In 2022, 79% of all homicides involved firearms, while 55% of all suicides involved firearms. Additionally, in that same year of 2022, 2,526 kids died by firearms. 30% of all deaths in that age group for the year were due to firearm-related incidents. Naturally, many people try to come up with several causes and solutions. One of the things many people point to is the lax mental health care in this country. So let's compare that with another developed country that has lax mental health care. When comparing to the two nations, the United States and Japan, we'll be looking at their rates of violent crime and suicide, as Japan doesn't really have gun violence. For example, in 2019, Japan had the second highest suicide rate of all developed nations. However, their disregard for mental health does not correlate to a high violent crime rate. The Japan crime rate statistics for 2019 was only 0.25, which is relative to a 4.23 decline from the previous year. Many people attribute the key differences here to be, obviously, quite simple. The freedom that you allow a person who is in that mental state to take. You allow them to potentially pass a background check and get access to a firearm. In many states, a person of age does not even need a permit to purchase a long gun. Another issue that people point to as the cause of this is the overall lack of security. I mean, I grew up in a somewhat fortunate uh, school, I should say, when I got older. So we did have a school officer, but he had to go back and forth between both high schools. And I don't even think he hit the technical third high school in our district. But every school should have at least one officer. And I mean, another piece of technology that could easily be added into a firearm is, I mean, my phone right here has an SSID chip in it. And if I committed a felony and I decided to go on run from any national agency, my phone provider would be required to give any information regarding my whereabouts, what I'm looking up, to law enforcement. They already have that information at all times. It's just about when they're required to give it up. There's been several different ways to try to combat this. I've even seen one company try to put like a lock at what would be like the feed of your gun, but again, that's stupid because one, you could have people potentially losing their information, not being able to use it in an actual self-defense situation. Then you have just adding technology into something mechanical always leads to the chance for malfunctions, and then that's not really going to prevent the main issue here that we're talking about, which is like actual domestic terrorism on innocent people, like schools, grocery stores, etc. But you could put an SSID chip somewhere in here that if it's ever removed, immediately you're stripped of a gun license. You can't buy a firearm again. Tampering, same thing if you put a fucking Glock switch or something, or if you sawed off the end of your barrel. Like, if you sawed off the end of your barrel of a shotgun, that's a felony. Just if you remove the chip, it's a felony. But then you put the sensor that interacts with what would be the A sensor. The B sensor would be in places of high interest, such as a store, school, etc. That way, the policeman or other officer already has access to that real-time data and knows when he needs to be prepared for a lockdown situation and when not to. Obviously, you wouldn't get everybody to come in, like, obviously you wouldn't get everybody to come and say like, hey, put a chip in my gun. But in the future, don't give them an option. Just start mass producing them like that. And eventually, over the years, it'll get weeded out. You can even offer people programs. Like, they do have programs for people when they have, like, I'm pretty sure there's literally been times where they have a gun that is no longer legal and they pay people to come, like, take it. Like, they'll give you a certain amount of money for something. Like, I've seen it all the time with, like, the mercury. My grandparents have mercury in their thermostat, and they'll get paid to go drop it off. Literally, just over time, over the course of like 20, 30, 40 years, you'd see a gradual decline. Because the place where, like, the gun violence is happening that you're never going to stop is these low income areas that aren't being policed anyways. And these people at this point are, like, literally 3D printing guns. You can't stop that unless you fundamentally change the ideology of these people. What you need to stop is the people running in there to your kids who had nothing to do with anything, and taking a weapon of mass destruction in there and firing off 10, 20 shots before anybody can even think. Why do you need a weapon that can hold 60 rounds before reloading? Why does anybody need that for home defense? I don't know if anybody's ever tried to fire a gun, but, like, if I tried to shoot, like, an actual gun equivalent of this, like, I'm going to boom, 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 it's going to be through the roof, and I'm going to break my wrist, and everybody around me is going to potentially be at risk of getting shot. You can't use something like that for home defense. Even for hunting. You're going to completely fuck, like, anything you shoot. Anything you shoot is going to be torn to shreds with that. You're not going to eat the meat. And, again, like, my grandfather, he owns a lot of firearms. Tell me why I look at a catalog, because I'm not somebody who's, like, totally 100% the most knowledgeable person on firearms. But why do I look at a magazine and I see there are these long guns, these assault rifles, these AR-15s, these AR-12s. Well, AR-12's a shotgun, but those are legitimately $300-$400. And then the pistols are upwards of 1,000 or 2,000, just because I understand you have to get your CPL, and it's a concealability thing. But don't you think in these areas where you're worried about that, just hire more security? Because if I can shoot 60 people without reloading, and my whole goal is domestic terrorism, I don't care what happens to me in the next 3 minutes after that. It's so delusional. Like you saw after 9/11. They took the proper procedures to make sure it never happened again. They did a fantastic job with airport security nowadays. I don't understand why it's not essentially the same thing after Sandy Hook, Columbine, Parkland. Like, how many more times do you need to see that? And then again, another thing I'll hear too is, oh, well, what if the government tries to revolt against me? Like you're going to start some form of militia. They'll roll an Apache down your block, flatten it in 20 minutes, throw some tear gas to make sure, and be gone. If there was ever an actual Civil War situation, one, what are you going to do against a drone? What are you going to do against any aircraft? What are you going to do against any bioweapon? Your little gun is not going to protect you. What are you going to do against a satellite microwave beam? And there's all those politicians who say, oh, well, it can never happen in my community. It could happen to anyone. The Buffalo shooter drove like 300 miles just to do what he did. It could happen to anyone on any day. It just happened. It just hasn't happened to you yet. It even happened in some of those highly policed areas, like MSU. Although that was a bit of negligence because it took a actual dorm room, whatever the RAs, I think they're called RAs, had to send the fucking video camera footage of a frat house camera to find the guy walking in the back alley. So in short, I just think as long as we have this notion that you can freely do whatever you want just because it's the way things are, and even if it will help for the greater good, that I don't have to relinquish some of my freedoms, at some point it's just a morality in an ethical thing, like for the greater good of society. I don't care if the government already knows where I am with my phone, the SSID chip thing from before. But like again, I don't have that much going on. I don't care. Like, be real with yourself. Who are you in the grand scheme of things? Government doesn't care. They're not gonna do anything to you if you put a little fucking chip in your gun, so they can prevent your kids potentially in the future from getting shot in the head in math class. Anyways, until next time.